Hi, my name is Ann Sermons Gillis, and I'm Vice President of the Theosophical Order of Service in the United States. And I'm here today to interview one of our longtime members, and also he is currently serving as the President of the Theosophical Society of America. I'd like to welcome Dr. Doug Keene. Welcome, Doug.
Hi, Ann. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Well, where is here? Where are you right now?
I'm in Wheaton, Illinois at the Olcott campus right now.
Okay, so the first question, going all the way back to the beginning, where were you born?
I was born in upstate New York, actually in Buffalo Hospital, many years ago.
And this question may be a little bit ambiguous for you to answer, and that is, where do you live now?
Oh, right now I'm splitting my time. I've lived in New Hampshire for the last 35 years, and we own a house there, my wife and I. And since I came into the position of the president of TSA, I've been living probably 60 to 65% of my time in Olcott, in Wheaton, and the other time is in New Hampshire when I'm not traveling.
Okay, so you are retired as a medical doctor, is that correct? Are you retired?
That's correct. I retired in February of 23.
And what was your specialty? What kind of practice did you have?
I was board certified in family medicine. Um, that's the name of the specialty in this country, but it's often referred to as primary care medicine.
And I know that's taken you some adventures. Could you just give us a little short thing about your, was it Doctors Without Borders? What were you in?
Well, something like that. Oh, I, I, I did a couple of things. First of all, when I was in medical school, I signed up for a program through the government to serve in an underserved healthcare area after I finished, and I had deferments through my residency training, my specialty training. And then I did serve in Alaska, in northern Alaska, in a place called Kotzebue. It's above the Arctic Circle. And I was there for 2 years providing medical care, mostly for the native population. And then toward the end of my career, in 2013, I had been in practice long enough to retire with some benefits, and I didn't want to retire from medicine, but I was interested in doing something else. So I actually went back to graduate school and got a master's in public health with a focus on global health because I had a lifelong interest in global health. And a couple of years after that, in 2015, my wife and I moved to Africa in a small country called Lesotho, and I worked there for 2 years with an organization called Ojai. That's the Lesotho Boston Health Alliance. So there's an agreement between the government of the small country of Lesotho and Boston University. And one of the people that were directing that program is someone I had trained with many years ago.
So could you spell the name of that country? I'm not familiar with it.
Lesotho. It's a very small country of 2 million people. It's actually completely within the borders of South Africa.
Goodness.
But they were never part of South Africa. They're very proud of their heritage. They're in the mountains in the eastern part of the country. They were a British protectorate for 100 years, and then they got their independence in the 1950s.
Okay, good deal. This may be somewhat of a difficult question, as a prize question, and that is, has your work as a doctor and being in the medical field helped you or hindered you in Theosophy? Did it make you more curious? I mean, was there any kind of cross-fertilization between these two seemingly very opposite fields?
Well, there was some influence, of course. I think probably the largest influence was, and this may have happened without Theosophy, I don't know, but it was an opportunity for me to be of service to an underserved population. And as I was in graduate school and learned about the disease burden of different countries and different parts of the world, I wanted to go there, first of all, to experience it, to see what life was like in a place where HIV was 25% of the population. And then secondly, to offer whatever, small service I could in the way of medical care.
And so since Theosophy is so much about service, then that part of your life and those desires that you had in you really melded very well with the idea of Theosophy. So
Well,
how did
it added to my motivation, I think, to do some type of service work in healthcare. And I was at a position in my life where I had been in practice long enough. My children were adults. My wife was ready to retire, so there was the opportunity that came up for this work, and I want to take advantage of that opportunity.
were you raised, this is switching the topic entirely, were you
Okay.
raised in a religion?
Yes, my family was Protestant, mostly Presbyterian, but at one point we moved around a fair amount. At one point we didn't have a Presbyterian church nearby, so we went to a Methodist church. But we were raised in that vein, and I went to church fairly regularly on Sundays.
Well, did your parents' beliefs influence your spiritual journey in a negative way or in a positive way, or just not at all?
Um, well, I think they were spiritual people, and they encouraged us children to be spiritual as well. I didn't really think too much about it other than attending church and sometimes church school and occasional special events until I got to college. And in college, I took some courses. I took one on metaphysics, I think, and one on Eastern religions. And it was very revealing. It was a completely different way of looking at religion, looking at life, looking at the world. And I was enthralled to a degree, not necessarily because I wanted to follow Hinduism or Buddhism, but because I thought, well, just have to look at it from a Western Judeo-Christian perspective. There's many different views of, human life and the meaning of life and the spiritual path. So it opened my eyes in that way.
Goodness, it sounds like you have had this innate curiosity your entire life for seeing the bigger picture. Is that true?
Certainly since I was a young adult, I was searching, learning some of the basic tenets of Christianity. It was a little bit hard for me to grasp some of the principles and the idea of, one life and then heaven and hell forever for eternity. Those things my young mind couldn't really wrap around very easily.
Because they seemed hypocritical or inconsistent, or they didn't make sense. What was it about those
It
principles?
just didn't really explain the apparent injustice in the world and suffering in the world.
Okay. So tell us a little bit more about your spiritual search. You told us you did the school, you did studied metaphysics and religion
Right.
in school.
So I was open to all different approaches and curious about them. And then after I graduated from college, I moved to Houston, Texas, and eventually made some friends. I was not yet into medical school. I was working in a blood lab for a year. And I had a friend that introduced me to esoteric philosophy. There was something called an esoteric philosophy center, and they did many new age things, palm readings, tarot, other things. And the leader was apparently clairvoyant, or at least he would go into a trance and have some communication with spirit world, or at least he seemed to. And he did past life readings, which I found fascinating. Actually, I sat for that once or twice, and I was attending classes there for a couple of years. And at that point, I did get into medical school, but not in Houston. I got into medical school at San Antonio. This particular teacher in Houston, I think, based a lot of his work on some of Alice Bailey's writings. So when I got accepted to medical school, obviously knew I was going to be busy, but he said, if you're interested in this material, there's a Theosophical Lodge there, Theosophical Society. We have a lodge in San Antonio. You might want to check it out. And after a while, I did, and I started going to the Theosophical Society in San Antonio while I was in medical school, and went there pretty regularly. I think they might have had once-a-month meetings, and actually, they asked me to present on one occasion, which I did. So I joined the Theosophical Society in San Antonio in 1980, right in the middle of my medical school years.
That's so cool. I didn't know that. Yeah, you probably remember I came from Texas, but you could have also gone to the Theosophical Society Lodge in Houston, but I get you didn't know about it then, but
I didn't know about it then.
certainly up and running. They've been operating probably 110 years by now.
Mhm.
So, how did you find Theosophy? When was it, what did you, was that, who did you say? Somebody helped you?
Yes, the leader of the particular group I was involved in with Houston had suggested the Theosophical Society. I went there, and Elaine Posey, her name was then, Elaine Gem was president, and she welcomed me, and I got to know some of the people, and I went regularly, and I decided that it resonated with me, and that I was going to join as a member, and I did that.
So you've been pretty much active since those days.
Well, on and off. Let's see. So I graduated in '82, so I left San Antonio and did my residency in Rhode Island. And there wasn't a theosophical group in Rhode Island, at least that I could find at the time. This was in the '80s. There was a group in Massachusetts, and I drove up there a couple of times to meetings, but I was extremely busy with my training. And it was, at least an hour and a half away. So I didn't go there very regularly. So it was a bit in a hiatus. Although I still, got the journal and did some readings and was, interested in theosophical topics and books. So I stayed connected that way, but I wasn't really in a group. Um, so after I finished my training, as I mentioned, I went to Alaska for 2 years. And of course, in Northern Alaska, there wasn't any opportunity to meet with theosophical um, members. So I mostly, again, just tried to keep up with on my own with readings and such. But after I finished in Alaska, my wife and I had talked a lot about where we wanted to live, and we kind of decided in New England, maybe the northern half of New England. And one of my top priorities after we got settled was to find a theosophical group, which I ultimately did.
So you live in New Hampshire now, at least part-time. Is there a lodge or a study group where you live now?
No, when I got back, we live in the southwest corner of New Hampshire, outside of the city of Keene. And I looked at all the study centers and lodges I could find. And the two closest one was one in Worcester, Massachusetts, and one in Springfield, Massachusetts. And I decided to go to the one in Springfield first, and I drove down there like an hour and a half for an evening meeting. And I went to that group, but actually Fernando de Torres was talking there, and he was from the Worcester group. He had a group in Worcester, so I really felt connected to his teachings and decided to join the Worcester group.
So you've been really in places where you did not have a lodge or a study group. And
Right.
I'm going to assume that the time that you had in a lodge or a study group was more supportive of your spiritual growth, just to be able to exchange ideas and so forth.
Right. Yeah. No, I was involved with the study group. It was on a weeknight. I think maybe Monday night I would drive down, even after work. It was a busy schedule, but to get down there on a weeknight, and I would meet with that group. But that group was small, maybe 5 or 6 people, and it gradually started to dissolve. I think a person or two passed away, and then a couple of people moved to Florida, and after a couple of years, it dissolved.
If someone wanted to start a study group, what would they have to do? If they're in their town, they've been studying Theosophy like you, they don't have a group, how could they form a group?
Well, there's a process to do that, and now that I'm at national, I see the other end of that. But you have to have at least 3 members that can meet and be members of that group, and then you have to there's a certain number of steps you have to go through, and then the board definitely has to approve lodges. I'm not sure they have to approve every study group, but you can have a study group, and then you can do all the things study groups do. You can study some of the Theosophical works, you can actually have public events, you can invite people, you can get on our website so people can find you. I was Eastern director for a while, and people would ask me, I live in so-and-so, Virginia, and is there a group near me? And I would find out if there was. But actually, the majority of our members are unaffiliated with lodges, just because as many lodges as we have, typically people live further away from lodges.
Thank you. And moving to another topic, and that is that I'm speaking to you today on behalf of the Theosophical Order of Service. And I just wonder, what is your idea of service? What is your definition?
Well, to do some work voluntarily, usually, or professionally, for other people as individuals or as groups, and to be able to sacrifice some of your time, effort, and energy in order to support people that are in a different situation, and they may be very needy. You can support them in a physical way, you can support them in a spiritual way. But there's many ways to serve humanity as the TSA.
Well, we know that you are serving now as the president, and that definitely is a service, and that you've been to other countries or states and helped in terms of medically serving. Is there any other thing that has stood out in your life that was a very valuable experience in volunteering or serving?
Well, before I started going, before I I've always guessed I've been interested in global health, but when my children were very young, I had a colleague that would go to Haiti and do some service work there. I had some connections there. And then when my children got a little older and my wife would let me leave for a week or so, I started going to Haiti to do medical work, volunteer medical work, and we would set up clinics. And I went with a number of different groups. I went with a Protestant group, I went with a Catholic group. And then I worked with someone who was also going on those trips. He was a physician assistant, and he decided to become a full-time missionary and practitioner in Haiti. And he moved down there and went through some training, and then he would invite groups down. So I started taking my own groups, and we would go down with a group initially of 20 or 25, and then after we made some changes, we could only go with smaller groups, so 7 or 8. I did that for 15, 16 years, going sometimes twice a year. So I made well over 16 trips to Haiti.
Wow, that's amazing. So when you say you took 30 people, do you mean they were all physicians?
No, we'd have a mix. We'd have 2 or 3 physicians, sometimes more. We had nurse practitioners. We had support people that were necessarily didn't have a medical background that could help package meds or distribute meds. Actually, my daughters, 2 of my daughters went with me to Haiti. My oldest daughter, one of my colleagues that I went with had a daughter about the same age, and then there was a nurse practitioner with a daughter again about the same age. So we did what we called the daughter trip, and we all took our daughters down, 3 daughters, and they were friends. Or got to be friends. They didn't went with us, and I think it's a wonderful experience for teenagers because they just get to see another side of life that they're not used to. And it's really eye-opening and awakening to them. I've had kids go down there, just had tremendous changes in their values, and they just realize, how bountiful their lives are, and that many, many people live with such deprivation.
That's wonderful. Well, you have 2 daughters. How old are your daughters?
I had 3 daughters. I had 2 daughters that went with
three
me.
daughters. Oh, you said 3 daughters. I thought, okay.
Only 2 went with me. Alder, the oldest, she's now 35. But when she was a teenager, that was the first daughter trip and such. And then my second daughter, Kendra, she wanted to go. And she really took to it. She loved working with a small group of people doing service projects. And she went with me 3 times. So she wanted to go whenever I did. So through high school and maybe her first year of college, she would go down with us and help us out. And she'd work in the pharmacy. And And then there's always a chance to play with the kids and just, connect with people, and she loves that part of it. And I had a third daughter, I have a third daughter, but the opportunity didn't come up and she wasn't particularly interested. She was a little bit, a little bit of a rebel, I'd say, just because her sisters did it. She didn't want to be forced into doing it. But she did some other types of volunteer work. So.
Well, I think we all understand children, especially when they're teenagers or when they're individuating. They want to go their way. They want to do it my way.
That's right.
So what aspects of Theosophy have most influenced your life?
Well, certainly the service piece, because I've done that. About the time I was going to go to Africa, I came to Ojai campus for a few days, and I also did the same thing for Krotona, and I was just wanted to just do like a personal retreat and just feel the energy and just be here for a few days before I made the shift. And I bumped into Tim Boyd, who was president at the time. He said he was meaning to contact me and would I be interested in coming on the board of directors as the Eastern District Director. And I told him that, I was planning to go to Africa and all the reasons that I couldn't do it. He said, well, that's fine, but I'd still like you to come on the board. And we only meet twice a year and you can zoom in. And it's not easy to say no to Tim. And I said, okay, fine. If you'd like me to come out, come on, and I'll work it out somehow. I did that. That was in 2015, I guess. 2014, I came on the board in 2014 with plans to go to Africa in 2016. So that's what I did.
So we're changing again. HPB says that Theosophy is altruism. Do you think that's true? And if it is true, how would you say that's true in terms of Theosophy and how that displays into the world?
Well, certainly the theosophical mindset has a large degree of altruism, sacrifice, and compassion. I know Jeffrey Hodson writes about that once you understand the unity of all life, your natural inclination is to relieve suffering through compassion. And the only way you can relieve suffering through compassion is to be of service. So I've tried to integrate that into my professional life and also my personal life. At the same time, I, do have a family, do have a job. I did have to, have a home, so I did have possessions, and there's certain things that I did for enjoyment. It wasn't always sacrifice, but I felt like I always want to have that element of service, even though it was a job. I worked in a nursing home for 5 years, and yeah, I was getting compensated for it. I was getting paid for it, but it was still service and still a work of joy because I was taking care of people who were very disabled and unable oftentimes to take care of themselves. So I was able to contribute in that way too.
So have you ever been to any of the theosophical camps? And if so, which ones?
Yeah, well, only Pumpkin Hollow, mainly because of geographic proximity. And even when the children were young, we took them one summer for a few days. And I've been to Pumpkin Hollow probably 8 or 9 times, I would think, over the years. So I was fairly familiar with that camp. I have not been to Inverlaya, but I wanted to go. When I became vice president in 2020, I decided when I was going to run for it in 2019, I wanted to visit each of the Theosophical camps. And then COVID hit. It was impossible to travel and the camps weren't open. So those are campus since closed. Far Horizons, I don't know how much longer they'll be open, but Inverlaya certainly is a place I want to visit sometime. But once I came into office, I've just been so busy I haven't been able to make those plans yet.
How is it different going to one of our camps or retreat centers than, like, for example, going to the Olcott campus to the Summer National Convention? What's the difference in those kinds of experiences?
Well, I think the energy is different. And obviously the geographic location is different. Olcott is a very special campus set aside, but it's in a fairly suburban area. Pumpkin Hollow is much more in a rural area and with cabins strewn throughout the property and just beautiful river and waterfalls and places to walk and that type of thing. So I think the mentality, especially obviously with the summer convention, it's a much larger number of people. But I've been to Pumpkin Hollow when there's 20 or 30 people there for a program, and of course they have their staff. So it's, I guess, a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more lower key, but still very vibrant as far as the theosophical teaching.
And so another thing, it sounds like it brings the more raw nature into one's life, and that you're in with what waterfalls, trees, and so forth, and communicate with something more than the intellect.
Yes, absolutely.
Have you been able to, or did you ever want to communicate any of these principles to your family, to your daughters? I don't know if your wife has been amenable to them. So how did that go? Since you were the one with the interest to start with, how did that play out?
Well, our children and our family children were raised with exposure to multiple different religious traditions. I, of course, had the background in Christianity and then moving into Theosophy. My wife was Jewish and she attended synagogue, and we had a family membership in the synagogue for many, many years. And the children would go there. We decided, since I wasn't Jewish, we weren't going to do the bat mitzvah. So we didn't do the christening either. We did what we call a naming ceremony, where we had the grandparents come and we did some verses and that kind of thing. It was very nice. But they grew up exposed to Judaism, exposed to Christianity, exposed a little bit to Theosophy. My wife Risa has been very supportive of Theosophy. She's felt that it was really my area of interest. She was more interested in pursuing spirituality through the synagogue. She since has become a member of the TSA, and she's always been supportive, and she understands some of the deeper teachings of unity and compassion. And she's a very compassionate person that's always been interested in other cultures. So that fits in. So we've kind of let it go organically to see how the children evolve. And although they're aware of all the different spiritual traditions, I don't think they've picked one for themselves yet. I've shared some theosophical writings, particularly my own, with them, and they're very interested in some of the principles. They ask me about it, and we have talked about it sometimes.
Thank you. Well, do you have any favorite books, theosophical books, or any particular authors that you?
Well, I think the first author I read was Annie Besant, and I find she is a favorite. I find her work very inspiring and just very easy to read, and
it's
comforting in a way.
Quite a contrast between Blavatsky's writing and Besant's writing.
There is. I think the first book I read was The Outer Court by Annie Besant, and I love that. I've read it a few times, and I think I've read almost all of her published books, maybe not quite, but I pick them up quite frequently. Other authors, a lot of foundational authors, and later I've read some of Leadbeater, certainly Taimni, The Science of Yoga, Man, God, and the Universe, Sri Ram books. Those are the authors I focus on mostly.
Well, also in addition to books, we have a lot of lectures that go on, where there's at the Summer National Conference. We have our Thursday night lectures. Are there any speakers that have contemporary people that speak to us through Theosophy that you've been attracted to or impressed with, or think that maybe it helps edify this whole theosophical experience?
Well, certainly some of our officers, I love to listen to Tim Boyd talk and Barbara Adyar, Juliana. I really enjoy Ravi Ravindra. I've read 3 or 4 of his books, and I find him fascinating and listen to him when he's speaking whenever I get an opportunity.
Those are some good people. So you're actually saying that we are surrounded at Olcott and internationally as well with Tim, with good theosophists that can get the message across and probably live what they speak.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that.
Well, in addition to the thoughts that we've had today, is there anything that you would like to say about Theosophy that I did not address?
Just that I feel like it's a privilege and an honor to serve the Theosophical Society in America, and I've done that as a member, and I've done that on the board as a Houston director. And when I was going to go off the board because my second term was expiring, I wasn't sure exactly how I was going to work with the society. And about that time, Barbara asked if I considered standing for vice president, which I did, and of course that led ultimately to standing for president. So I feel it's an honor to be so involved and now to even help set direction of the Theosophical Society in America for the next couple of years and even for the next decade. So we're making decisions now that are going to impact on the services we provide over the next many years.
Well, the Theosophical Society definitely has its place in the world arena, and you have now taken up your spot in the Theosophical Society of America, and you will go down in the annals of Theosophy. And we thank you so much for your service and also appreciate you being here today. Thank you so much, Doug.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure. It was easy to do, and I